ahead, I'll start going.
Okay, I just hit the start broadcast.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so I'm Zak Zebrowski. I work at MITRE. This talk is offensive and defensive techniques for determining web user identity. Hopefully everything is good. The content is available at a.zakz.us/boston.html. And hopefully everyone can follow along there. There's a slight chance that we might be interrupted by a thunderstorm as I'm looking out the window, so I'm hoping that that everything will go according to plan. So yeah, if everything is okay with you, I'll start now. Cool, awesome. Okay. Yeah, I can. If you start doing the phantom mining like this, I can definitely see if something happens. So that's perfect. Okay. Yeah, and I have the dual monitor set up, which is why I'm looking at two different places at once. So yeah, this is Boston.pm. This is the slide. Again, the URL is a.zakz.us/boston.html. In addition to that, this is the license for this material is actually under Creative Commons Share Alike version number 3, which is awesome. The other thing is that it's all publicly available at opensecuritytraining.info/web identity. This is also basically in addition to this version of the course, which is about an hour talk. There is a bunch of other topics that are discussed there that are more low level, so like the hacking into your Intel BIOS or something like that. That's all there. It's all presented there. It's all Creative Commons license. It's all good. And also, if you want to see the super long version of me talking about this, I have a YouTube video of about 4 hours on that URL as well. So, who am I? Well, I am just another Perl hacker. If you look up, I have the Twitter handle JAPHARL, standing for Just Another Perl Hacker Arlington. And I realize that Arlington, Massachusetts does exist, but since no one else claimed it, I did. And you can reach me at my Gmail account. All of my work that I do is in Perl, so that's awesome. I dabble in internet security, which is what we're going to be talking about here today. Cool. Okay, awesome. Yeah, I just wanted to check to make sure that there wasn't any questions. 1 second. Okay, so if you go to perlish.org//zaz/course/lab.html, you can get to all of the lab content for this course. Let's open it up in a new window for a second here. So we have a couple of links here, which I'll be talking about later. emv.pl is basically this almost standard Perl script. These are your environment variables. I made a couple of modifications to that. Location HTML5 is something we'll talk about later. Basically, this is using Wi-Fi or other techniques to identify where you are as part of the HTML5 standard, so it won't be going away anytime soon. The 2 installed fonts demos basically show you what fonts are installed on your machine. These are interesting, and a couple of other little things here which I include, and I'll get back to that later. But yeah, this is publicly available as well, and it's all good. So what I'm going to be talking about in this course is basically a couple of different things. One is the introduction, which we just basically did, but I'm going to cover like 2 more points a little bit later on. Characteristics of connecting to the internet. Basically, when you connect to the internet, there's a couple of unavoidable facts that you have to deal with. And when I say unavoidable in this case, I mean that because of the fact that you connect to the internet, there are things that we know about you, and you can't really avoid them, regardless of how you're trying to hide that. We'll talk about identifying web users. These are different techniques that you can use to identify who is remotely accessing your website. And then we'll talk about obfuscating yourself as a web user. So far, so good? Awesome. Okay. So why do we want to bother to begin with? We want to know if your website, if you have a website, we want to know, particularly if you're a bank, if you're in the US or if you're in the UK. Alternatively, there may be times when you don't want to be coming from the US, and these are different ways of doing that. If you want to hide who you are on the internet, people need to do that too. So cool, you want to be an elite hacker? Actually, not really. Everything in this presentation is old. Linux and Perl related content will be highlighted. Actually, it's going to be slightly more Perl than Linux content that will be highlighted, but that's all good. So ethics, remind here to use what you learn here for good, not evil. I'm not a lawyer. Everything you do is at your own risk. So if you go to jail, I won't be trying to get you released. That's basically what that boils down to. So characteristics of internet connections. There are a couple of different questions you have to ask when you are connecting to the internet. The first is, what devices allow you to connect to the internet? The second one is, when are you accessing the internet? And the third one is, how are you connecting to the internet? Basically, you can't escape these characteristics regardless of what you try to do, so these are all different ways that can identify you. As far as what, there's almost easier to say what device doesn't connect to the internet: your computer, cell phone, TV, alarm clock. If you have a new Raspberry Pi, that's awesome. If you have a car, in this case car, there's a couple of Ford ones that actually connect to the internet for you, trying to give you directions and all that other stuff. And also, like, they can send you alerts that your car is needing maintenance. That type of stuff is what we're talking about here. When. And the reason why I care about what is because you can identify them. You can be identified by the type of computer you're connecting with. When? Well, a user needs to sleep, and when you sleep can imply location. So I'm going to try to go to this URL here. And I just heard a loud thunderclap. Okay. So this should be coming up here in a second. Okay, so I'm going to try zooming in too, because that's a little small here. Okay, so the Internet Census is a website that is actually, it was a group of people that basically used hacking for good type thing, where they were able to determine basically that during the course of the day, more people are online and more devices are online as compared to when it's nighttime and devices turn off. So it may not be too clear to see here, but if you look at the day sort of going from day to night, you notice how you got blue here. Now we're turning green because the sun is up, and now it's getting dark because it's getting it cycles through the course of the day. You can sort of see by the color of the chart, the brighter colors are more devices being turned on, and the darker colors are more devices being turned off. And because of the fact that this was done independently, that's very interesting to show that, yes, more people use the internet during the day. So that's a good thing. And that's definitely a characteristic of someone that could possibly try to identify you. So I'm now going to return back to the presentation here, but that's an identification technique for when you're trying to identify people. How? So there's you're connecting to the internet, and basically you have to connect to the internet. This isn't like a basically you can't do it, a device has to do it for you, and therefore you're using a connection to actually connect to the internet. In the old days we used dial-up cell phone type connections. Now most people have DSL or cable, and of course there's Fios or other options that get more expensive but are also faster, and people obviously like the faster speed more, but that implies that you're connecting from a city as compared to someplace rural. So those are all interesting characteristics to be aware of. Identifying web users. So we'll now start talking about identification techniques of being able to identify different types of user. We'll talk about IP geolocation, and also what your browser exposes when you connect to the web page. Before I do that, does anyone have any questions on the previous content, basically the characteristics of the internet connection that you can't escape? Awesome, okay, I'll continue. So, identifying web users with IP geolocation is what we're going to be talking about first. IP geolocation is basically the name of a technology which is really more of, it's basically really more of a database of IP addresses to physical location. Companies and open source utilities and websites provide this IP geolocation in various formats, which you can download and use for your internal applications. The other thing is that there are now web services that even allow you to use this information without without requiring you to actually download or install anything. So that's pretty cool. These sources generally provide other attributes about the IP address itself, as well as IP geolocation information. This is generally a byproduct of the analysis that they perform. Because if I'm going to determine that you're in a location from, say, MIT.edu, at that point, if I can associate that IP address with MIT.edu, I know the domain name, I know the ISP org, and other similar types of information. So how does one create an IP geolocation database? There's a couple of different techniques here, and I'm going to be talking about the open source ones, not the commercial sources. So there's a few different ways. The first technique is to just ask the user. So hostip.info is a very interesting website, and I'm going to actually exit this presentation for just a second. I'll go here to hostip.info. And this is the website that says that right now I'm in Reston, Virginia, which is actually incorrect. I'm about 20 miles away. So I can say, is this information wrong? I can then click on make a correction. If I were to do that, it then goes through basically a wizard of saying where you are. So instead of saying, I could update it to the city name of Arlington, and it would be in Arlington, Virginia. And to verify that I'm not a robot, that matched, and now it has updated information. So that's actually a reasonable way of getting a database of IP geolocation information. And that's what hostip.info does, and they actually have a forum where they talk about other techniques as well that they use. A second technique is to query registries. Software77.net, which is actually a South African company, basically just scrapes the Whois registries, and basically, depending on where that Whois registry comes from, they parse it out and they say that therefore this IP address is associated with this Whois register, which is which has a country of the United States. So that's all very good information. But of course, there's a couple of issues with Whois information. There's two main types of things that can be that can introduce fraudulent information into the Whois database. So the first one is that people generally, especially early on in the internet, didn't necessarily have to tell the truth when they were registering a Whois IP address. So that's because of the fact that you're not compelled to tell the truth. Not everyone does. The second thing is that if you're working for a large company, your whole IP range could be registered to, say, Texaco, which is in the U.S., but you could have a subsidiary in Africa, and that African IP address would not be associated with Africa; it would actually be associated with the United States. That's basically the issue with Whois registries. And there are a bunch of other IP geolocation caveats. You can only get to most visible IP address. So if someone's using a proxy, there's really no way of knowing that unless it's a well-known proxy, which may or may not actually show up. The time frame, because of the fact that you're dealing with a database and people have to process it to figure out where an IP address is, there's always going to be a time delay issue. Also, IP addresses change about 1% to 2% a month. So these are all issues that people have to deal with. The domain name resolution can be limited. This is if you have a database provider that's providing that information, it may be limited to a certain extent, just because of the fact that they don't have information on all the various subdomains of a master domain. For netted IP addresses, if you have a netted IP address at home, you would get to that IP address, but if I was then SSHing from work and my work is in a different location, you would not have that information available. It would only get to the most publicly available IP address. So again, when it was, this is from the Maxmind data set, and this is slightly dated at this point, but when I went to Maxmind.com and asked for my IP address, it came back with Waldorf, Maryland, and instead of Arlington, Virginia. But because of the fact that Maryland is reasonably close to the U.S. to Arlington by, say, 30 miles or so, it's actually not a bad guess. Any questions or so at this point? I thought I saw the hand waving. Oh, hey, that's lightning. Okay, I'll continue on. And yay, we'll, for the first time in a while, we'll now talk about some Perl content. There's definitely a couple of databases and Perl libraries that allow you to do this type of information. And GeoIP and GeoIP2 is two libraries that are provided by Maxmind.com to query their information. IP Country is another one that's actually by a different company providing an API in Perl. GeoIP Free is using the software77.net library to look up IP address information. GeoIP, our UIP GeoBase is yet another library. This one actually comes from Russia, and I can't read any of that information, but apparently that's another reasonable source for IP geolocation information. And these are all available on cpan.org. So now we'll talk about what your web browser exposes when you go to various websites. We'll talk about, by default, basically as soon as you make a connection, what is displayed. Some of the things that you can do with scripting. And also we'll talk about external connections and what that implies. And I just got a severe thunderstorm warning, so hopefully we'll be able to continue here without issue. So we'll first talk about what we get by default. So if you're going to connect to a web server via HTTP, the web server knows your remote IP address. It can know your remote host if it's set up and configured to resolve that information. In some cases, web servers don't do that because that is a slight time delay. The web server can know what user agent you're using. So if you're using, I think at this point it was Firefox I was using, it would include your preferred language, which is telling you that it's English and the US subversion. That way people can know. Cookies can be exposed, but that's almost a function of the web at this point. There is the Perl module, Perl HTTP browser detect. That will basically allow you to programmatically iterate over the various type of web browsers and see a bunch of information about that. So when we go to this website, zak.freeshell.org/env.pl, on a good day, hold on one second while I exit out of the presentation. Okay, so I'm going to go to perlish.org, /env.pl. This is returning information about a couple of different things. I'm going to okay, so I'm going to try to show a couple of different things here. I'm using Chrome as my web browser, so Chrome actually doesn't include the environment, the language I'm using. The IP address I'm using does not appear to be a Tor exit node, which is a good thing. Using IP geolocation, it returns that I'm in the United States, which I am. So these are all good things. And there's a lot of information here that is returned, which you can go through. Oh, and also the HTTP accept language, which is up here, is set to English US. So that's basically letting the web server know that we're using the English US as our keyboard, which allows you to query information, which is all good. Which allows you to present the information using the English US subset of information. If you had a chance, by the way, to see at YAPC or at another conference near you, there was a talk on Unicode CLR by, I'm just not recalling the person's name off the top of my head, but if you search for Unicode CLR and Perl, it will on probably through Google actually, because I'm not 100% sure I'm remembering the right thing. It returns information about it will return basically how each of the different types of languages that are then subdivided by countries, how each country actually has its own way of displaying date information or country code information, and this is all provided to you in a nice Perl module wrapper, and it's really awesome. So that's something else to look at. Speaking of this information, okay, so I'm going to exit out full screen for now. I'm going to go here, and I'm going to present again. Okay, so so now we're going to talk about different pieces of information you can determine via scripting. There's a couple of different ways that you can do this, and we'll talk about some of them now. The JavaScript Location API is freaking awesome. Evercookie.js is a Perl module, not Perl module, but it's a library that's written in JavaScript that uses a whole bunch of different techniques to set a cookie within the browser. And we'll also look at fonts to determine what company, in theory, you are coming from. And I say in theory because I actually don't have the technique here, but it's all good. So here is a way of doing that. Panopticlick.eff.org is a website which tries to identify web browsers' uniqueness, and they do a bunch of different techniques through scripting. And this is all being done with JavaScript information. So if we click on the Test Me link on the site, and we don't need to allow Java to run, in addition to returning the browser plugin details, it returns the system fonts. Now, in some cases, the system fonts that are returned could include fonts of your company name, and that's basically the reason why you want to use that as part of your toolkit to identify who your remote web user is, because they may have a company font installed. So that's really interesting and fun. And because it's JavaScript, you can create the appropriate Perl modules on the server side to record that information using database lookup or what have you. JavaScript Location API is another technique. It's a new feature of HTML5, and what you are allowed to do is basically, if you give the browser permission to determine your location, it will try to very accurately to determine the location of your web browser. So, hey, they changed the URL. Okay, so I'm going to go to zak.freeshell.org and go down to lock.html. Now, it will prompt you to want to share your computer's location. If you hit the allow script, it will show you where the web browser thinks you are. And because of the fact that we had a power outage this weekend, it's not actually too accurate, but it thinks, the web browser thinks that I'm in the town of Alexandria, because this is probably based on my IP address. So that's a JavaScript way of determining approximately where someone is. That's pretty darn cool. In the past, when I've had some colleagues do this that were actually working from home, it was actually accurate down to the neighborhood where their house was, so that's pretty cool. So evercookie.js is actually a library that was compiled by a hacker that uses about 7 different techniques to set cookies in your web browser. Now they say that it says that the evercookie can't be revoked, which is almost true. There are different ways to do it, but it's not easy. Basically, because of the fact that the library uses HTML5 features, Flash, and JavaScript, there are many other techniques that are created that can't be easily removed from the web browser, so people, if they really want to, using scripting, can identify you if they are allowed to set that cookie once. The other thing that you can do is you can try to get browsers to open a connection using non-standard connections. Basically, because of the fact that if someone's using a SOX proxy, they may configure it incorrectly for different types of connections, and and even though they think they're doing everything right, that might be a way to possibly identify someone. And there's actually a great presentation here called, if you go to defcon.org, in DEFCON 17 there was a presentation called Attacking Tor at the Application Layer. This is a very interesting way of doing that. again, this is something that you can use Perl for to record this information. And oh, by the way, this is common. The reason why is that companies think that this information is very valuable, and people are trying to make there are companies that are trying to make a profit by uniquely identifying all of the machines on the internet. So it will be very interesting to see, especially with the Internet of Things, how this pans out in the end. Okay, so this is the end of the identification portion of this. Do we have any questions at this point? We're good? Okay. I didn't get that. What was that?
The Unicode query you mentioned, the
Yes.
first.
I'm sorry, I was just acknowledging you. Sorry for the delay.
Well, what was the Unicode item you mentioned?
I think it's Unicode CLDR. Let me see if I can bring it up. Okay, CLDR number. This is by Nick Patch, I think? Yeah, Nick Patch.
Oh, okay, we know Nick.
Okay, and he wrote this library which queries the Unicode CLDR, and basically he wrote formatting so that you can call subroutine and it will automatically format for a given locale the number correctly. So one of the interesting ones here is that if you're in the U.S., you say 999. If you're using English, but you're from Canada, you say U.S. 999. And if you're in French, in Canadian French, you use 9,99 space U.S. dollars. So all these are slightly different, and this library allows you to do that. And cool. It's an interesting way of identifying people too.
Any other questions while we're? No. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so we'll now talk about the simple obfuscation techniques. We'll then talk about Tor, and then we'll talk about some email techniques. I will fully admit this portion is not quite full of Perl content, but it's not too bad. If you're interested in the subject matter, hopefully it will be useful. So one of the things that you can do is just borrow your neighbor's open Wi-Fi connection. Now this isn't as plentiful as it was, but you might be able to do it if you know the right neighbor. The other thing is that you need not necessarily be next door. There are different types of antennas that extend the range of your communication, possibly up to 189 miles if everything is correct. Basically, or 260 miles with with a balloon, if you can take into appropriate counts of the shape of the Earth and the other geographical terrain issues. But basically, this is just to say that with the right antenna, probably anything is possible. Given radio communications, that's really all Wi-Fi is. You just need the right antenna to do stuff, and magically stuff happens. And you need not be exactly near door. You may have to be close, but it doesn't have to be as close as you necessarily think. And according to a wireless fact that I queried at one point, is generally not legal to not legal for you to try to hack into someone's network connection for illicit purposes, or to break a secured wireless access point. However, it is generally illegal if someone gives you the password for basic incidental personal use of the internet. And I am not a lawyer. Do not go to jail based on this advice. But this is something that people have brought up and worry about. With that said, about 50% of the people in 2007 admitted to borrowing someone's neighbor's Wi-Fi connection. I'm guessing that at this point it's lower because more people are securing wireless access points, but still, it's still something to consider. Another way of obfuscating your location is to grab yourself a shell account. A shell account is basically a MS-DOS-like command window, which then you can run commands on. And there's a couple of different ways of having text-based web browsers, which is pretty cool. So that's a pretty simple way of obfuscating where you're coming from, and it's fun. There's a couple of different ways of getting shell accounts. One is through Perlish.org, which is a user group. If people are interested in a Perlish.org account, I can send a link out to the user account request list at some point, and we can add you. Freeshell.org is basically a BBS-like provider, and the cost for that is free. It does. If you want to, you can provide a $36 fee for outbound access, which is pretty nice of someone basically doing this as a free service, or at least reasonably cost service. Web hosters, prices that were valid in 2010, they can provide you web hosts as well. The prices are completely random though, and your home PC if so set up. Cloud services.
Yeah, we're there.
Zach,
Okay.
We know all about getting shell accounts.
Okay, awesome. I'll continue. And you can browse the web through shell accounts.
Email them from my std.world account.
Gotcha. Okay. I'll still briefly do this demo though. What I'm going to do is SSH over to b.zaxb.us and browse to the EMV page on freeshell.org, because there's actually something pretty interesting here. I'm going to just open the window here without sharing it for a second while I do some actually doing the login and changing the settings so that the font size is reasonable for demo. Okay. And now I'm going to make Google Hangouts use that screen. Okay, so now you should see that I'm SSH over to b.zaxb.us. You see Zaz at b_. If I do elinks freeshell Zaz, or I'm sorry. If I were to do this, the HTTP accept language is in English. I'm on Debian Linux. The IP address is 31.220.24.210. And it thinks that right now I'm in Germany instead of the fact that I'm in the US, which is actually true because the SSH server where I released the service from is actually in Germany, so that makes sense. That's pretty cool. And yes, I want to exit. I'll just quickly exit out of that. So basically what I'm trying to say there is that the last part of the domain needs not correspond with the actual location that you're sharing. So yeah, just because the domain ends in the US or UK, that doesn't mean that's where the server is actually located. I'll briefly talk about Tor. Tor is a popular anonymous proxy. It's good for obfuscating users. It can be a bit slow. If you are on Linux, you can just do and on Debian, you can do a sudo apt-get install Tor, and then you can start using it. If you want graphical user interfaces, the Tor project provides software bundles for Windows, Macs, and Linux, which all you have to do is double-click and magically just works. Tor also has a concept of hidden sites, which are one-click and you will violate federal law sites. So basically, you are entering the dark side of the web and proceed with caution, but it's something that you need to know about when you're using Tor because it's a service of it. And with all that said, governments have tried to block Tor. This is a reasonably old presentation now that was given at the Computer Chaos group a while back. That's in Germany. If you're interested to see how many people actually use Tor on a daily basis, metrics.torproject.org has that all information. They have historical information as well. This is all good stuff. So I'm going to briefly show you how to do that. I'll SSH over to zakz.us again and just use Torify quickly. Should have left my window back up for just one very quick second. This will take me just 1 second. Okay, so now when I do the request through Torify, which is Tor, in this time of things, I actually am in Germany again, which actually makes sense because there's actually a lot of Tor exit points within Germany. Sometimes, though, that's actually not the case. Sure, 1 second while I enlarge the font. Okay. Now I can't read it. Okay. Okay, a Tor exit node is basically, the question is, what is a Tor exit node? A Tor exit node is basically you send your basically what Tor is a proxy. So you send your communication into Tor and then it exits out of a random IP address on the other side. So a Tor exit node is actually the name of the computer that actually sends the request from Tor to the appropriate endpoint. That's basically what Tor is. Tor checks this current. Okay, hold on. I'm going to change the URL here slightly. It's been a long day. Okay, so now when I go to perlish.org, which says that the IP address does not appear to be an exit node. I'm guessing that Tor, for some reason, it was just misconfigured on the server. I'll have to get back and figure out exactly what's wrong with that at another point. And I'm sorry that this particular demo did not go according to plan. But such is the case with live demos, unfortunately. So, yeah, that happens. Out of that, and I'll try to fix that at some point later. So I'll now talk about a couple of different email obfuscation techniques. Basically, why we want to talk about obfuscating email is just because of the fact that you may have a need to send an email either anonymously, or you don't want to have complete attribution as to where you are. This is basically the type of setup that you can do to do this type of stuff. Mailinator.com is a disposable read-only email address. So basically, you create your username and you can have people send email to that random name at mailinator.com, and you might be able to and you will be able to read that email if you go to the appropriate page. It doesn't allow for sending of email addresses, but that's something that might be that's not possible within mailinator.com. If we go to mailinator.com, and I'll show you this, which will hopefully be better. You can check anyone's email address. So if I were to say I am root at mailinator.com, if I am root at mailinator.com received any messages, it would show up here. So basically, why would you want to do this in the first place? It's just so basically you can have spam going, instead of going to your real email account, you can do that. You can then actually also have an RSS feed for a random address. So you could have like root, which I'm sure has a ton of different messages, and it turns out it does. So you can then look at anyone's email account or someone that communicated with root at mailinator.com. So it's all good. It's interesting. It's a good way of trying to receive email anonymously. The other thing you have to keep in mind is that there are vulnerabilities to any anonymous browsing technique. If you are using known software bundles, you can actually try to get information out of the bundle that would identify you. Web browsers will always have vulnerabilities that can be exploitable. If someone were to write something, that could be one type of attack. New features of JavaScript may not be filtered out depending on the proxy version if you have an HTTP proxy in between. So, like there was one time when I was on an early version of the Android Tor client application, and the JavaScript for using the Location API actually worked perfectly well. So because of the fact that the JavaScript wasn't being appropriately filtered, that was, even though the IP address that I was coming from, I think Germany again, it showed the JavaScript Location API correctly said that I was in Arlington. So these are all different ways that you can attack Tor. Again, see the attacking Tor at the application layer as a different way of thinking about identifying web users' locations. So basically, everything, all these different techniques you can do. All these different techniques of identifying users, you can either use them for offense or defense, and that's just really cool. So at this point, if you go to opensecuritytraining.info, you can do that, and I'll go back to the main screen here with my face in case people have questions. So, do we have questions?
Possibly.
Okay.
I'm going to turn the camera around.
Cool. Hey, you disconnected the camera.
Yeah, I disconnected the camera so that it wouldn't slew horribly.
Hey, Zach, we're here's something silly.
Yep.
At the bottom of the screen here, I don't know if you can see it, there's at the bottom of the screen here, there's a link that is the Zaken Bridge. So it's basically some of your name. Big new bridge in Boston. Not that new anymore.
The Boston signature skyline item is a bridge called Zakim, Z-A-K-I-M.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we've adopted it for the Perl mongers. And so just below the presentation, as part of our event, it links to that. So Zakim is running just below Zak.
Oh, that's awesome. It's always cool to see that. I remember I have driven over that bridge once, and I recall that it was on a Friday, and I was going about 5 miles per hour.
Oh,
typical.
Oh wait, you were speeding.
Yeah, I know.
Shame on you, going 5 miles an hour there. It hurt something. Before the bridge opened, I walked on it, then I had a public tour. I got some great pictures of it.
That's awesome. Cool.
I know the comments about your talk. I just had to mention Zaken.
No worries. That's all good. Does anyone else have questions? Pretty good.
Having dabbled in some of the same areas, I found it a very interesting compilation.
This is something that I keep updating, and I'm going to try to get the latest 2-day version of the course release, which has a bunch of other new techniques of doing this. The issue is going through the public release is a non-trivial effort, so I was very happy when I was able to get this released. So hopefully, again, when I do that, I'll be able to update people with the latest technologies and include some Perl techniques too, because there's definitely a possibility for that.
Zach, is this something you've done inside MITRE?
This is something that I compiled through MITRE. So
that's why you're releasing it?
Yes. So, like, basically, what I did was I took the MITRE allows people to teach at the MITRE Institute, which is sort of their own internal learning program, and basically over the course of like 2 weeks of solo project time, I was able to compile this course together for the full day version. The 2-day version was released. Was the first time I presented it earlier this year. I'm going to have to go through and sort of redo that until that's in a sort of a releasable state. So we'll see how far we can get. So yes.
Having been through that paperwork in a previous century with the MTRs, M-papers that became Uncle Mike's book, I sympathize.
Thank you. It's possible, but like it really does require a good effort to go through the appropriate channels to do this. So that's cool. So I have a question here about what defenses are there against the super cookie. There really is no good defense against the super cookie. What you probably want to do is to actually try to get your browser into a clean state. So that would generally mean reinstalling the OS or something drastic like that level if you think people are doing this. Now the thing is that most of the time people are not doing this. And also because of the fact that you are in, there's also laws against doing this type of stuff too. But yeah, running a bare bones VM bringing it up, browsing the web, shutting it down, removing it, that's not a bad approach.
Does the super cookie work against the incognito mode or private mode?
The incognito mode is okay, but it's not perfect. So they're sort of complementary. But the issue is that with the incognito mode, or at least at the last time I looked at the research papers that people that were presenting on it, there were still techniques that people could use to sort of identify through the incognito mode some behaviors of what you were doing. In theory, the various cookies should not be set. However, in some cases they may be. If you were to go to the sami.pl evercookie site, you may be able to look at for your current browser if it would work in incognito mode or not. It sort of depends on the version of the browser and the version of Flash, and it's not easy.
Rule one: don't install Flash.
Unfortunately, it's not quite that easy, because in addition to Flash, there's also Microsoft has its own Silverlight type implementation. Also, HTML5, which is a new browser standard, there's different ways of storing information which may not be correctly removed at the end of the session. It really is a headache, unfortunately, if you're trying to worry about that. So, I mean, one thing you can do that is reasonable is to have something like a VM that you bring up, browse the web, shut down, remove, and just try to keep that VM up to date. Which again becomes a sort of a nightmare for you to go through, but that's something that could be done.
Little Sammy story. I know Sammy. He was at the very first Perl Yapsi conference in Pittsburgh. He was 13. He came on his own.
Oh, wow.
He was already hacking Linux and things like that back then. And the story I remember about him then, he said that he installed Linux on his mother's PC, and she got very pissed. That's awesome. About it, she was probably running Windows, some bastard running Windows, and he installed Linux on it. So he was hacking from way early on. And he's the guy that wrote the Facebook worm and got in trouble. He was off the internet for a year as his punishment. And it's got, I've talked to him in the last year or two. He's got a lot of security stuff on his site, all these weird tricks. Like, he can figure out your real email address just by scanning all kind of information about you.
I saw that presentation. That was awesome.
Something you can do, tricks and things, as one particular thing, and it can figure out what your address is, like particularly a CEO.
That definitely was scary.
Yeah, he is one scary little bastard.
He is.
He knows shit.
Ricky, did you have a question?
Yeah, actually, iPhone or Android?
He says iPhone or Android.
The one that, with respect to the Tor client that I was using?
Well, actually, yeah. My question is really, what do you know of the Tor client for iOS that is useful? Because they don't have an official one.
I didn't quite get all that.
He asks, is there a Tor client for iOS that's useful, since there isn't an official one?
The one that people have been using is called the Onion browser, I think it is. Hold on a second, I have it on my phone. I mean, what I do personally is I don't use it for anything, like, because of the fact that this all goes back to me, I just use it really just for looking at the environment variables to say, oh, that's interesting. It is called, where are you? Where are you?
Hey, it's anonymous. It's hiding.
It is hiding. Oh, man, hold on a second. Oh, I think it is called Onion Browser, or possibly just Onion. and it's like a $2 application or something like that. But it does connect to Tor. It seems to be doing the right thing. There are known bugs with it. Basically, the way that Apple implemented the web browser, there are a couple of times when you are exiting protocols, and what I mean for that is that you're using the new HTML5 video, where that could actually leak information. There is also another weird case, which if you go to the Onion browser website, it will go through and list all the different things that could identify you. Oh, and also the HTML5 Location API, because of the fact that it's in JavaScript, it can't be turned off for some reason on the Onion browser. So that's what I use for iOS. For Android, there was one which I'm not recalling the name of, but
There's an
it was
official
2 years ago.
He says it's an official release for Android.
Oh, really? That's awesome. Okay, I should look into Android again at some point. I just don't like the whole Java thing on Android.
Yeah. I'm a little worried that paying $2 for the client leaks a little information.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like everything else. I mean, if you really want to be anonymous, you're not going to be doing it. You probably aren't going to be doing that. But like if you're paying,
Anonymous, be a hermit.
yeah. I mean, there are different ways of connecting to Onion. Like there's onion.to, which allows you to get into the Tor things through a regular web browser. But again, because you're doing that, there's different ways that people can try to identify you because you're actually coming through a regular through a regular web session instead of a proxied web session. So all the JavaScript that people want to do, they can try to do against you.
Do you think any of this stops the NSA? No.
No. I have no knowledge on that, but yeah, no. So, if you have, like everything else, if you have money, you're good. Yes, I have used Tor as a Raspberry Pi as a Tor router. It works pretty well. I have it running just a Tor client on my Raspberry Pi down here for a long time without any issue.
What benefit would that have?
It's not really a benefit. It's really more just that because of the fact that I mean, Raspberry Pi is just a general purpose Unix computer. Right. So it's running Debian. So anything almost that you can run on Debian, you can run on the Raspberry Pi. There are some small caveats with particular modules that are doing some weird stuff. Like that are Intel specific, but otherwise it should be okay.
So the question I'm asking is, what's the benefit if you're running as a router in your home?
It's inexpensive to
It's
operate.
inexpensive. It's $35.
I understand that.
And doesn't use a lot of power.
I know what a Pi is and all that. I'm just asking. That's a router for it.
I'm sorry. What was that last one?
I'm asking, what is the benefit of using it as a router? Does it help you with being anonymous or security? Or maybe you can wipe it out more easily and reload it.
Yeah, you can just throw it in the trash and it's gone.
There is an advantage to using a Tor router that is external to your computer.
Oh, okay.
Because that way, if you have some software that tries to breach proxy running on your browser, it still can't get out past your local network.
Okay, that's what I was asking. If this is an external router, you can have a firewall.
Exactly.
Okay.
All good. Tor is good. I mean, it's something that I just use to not do anything interesting with, but it's all good.
So if you were trying to create a proxy that continually changes the information through?
I'm sorry, I did not get that at all.
Does anybody create a proxy that continually changes the information that gets sent through?
Yes, the issue there is software that the Tor project uses to filter information. They're relying on open source software to do that. So then it's a matter of trusting the open source software.
Outside of Tor,
I'm sorry, outside of Tor, there are a couple of different ways. There are some proxies that do that. You can look into the one that Tor project is using. Like they're using NoScript on the browser. They're also using, I think, a proxy, a man-in-the-middle type of thing, to remove some of the JavaScript and also to remove the meta headers. So there are. Let me look for just 1 second here.
I'm thinking more through what changes the user agent with every request, or changes, because I know that UT, the sort of semi-standard underscore UTMZ cookies, changes the data in those by the time something goes to build.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that.
Forging the various environment data.
Yep.
And mixing it up on a regular basis.
Yes, you could do that, and that would make things hard.
That'd identify you as a person of interest immediately.
Yes, it would. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, as soon as you are trying to use a web browser in a non-web browser way, you then become someone that's different, and you have to start asking why. So you can do things like this. There's proxy programs that allow you to do that, like Proximatron, which allows you to basically remove all these different headers or stuff like that. But the issue is that then you start to stand out.
You're better off lying and saying you look like Internet Explorer 10.
Yep. There can be times when that's interesting. Oops. Yeah, and like Tom points out, that's a great way for you to break websites and all that other stuff, because you then start breaking web sessions. And hi, Tom.
Well, is that good, kind of done, or?
Good to meet you.
Tom, you done? Yeah. I don't work out here. Ricky?
Yeah, aside from Yuri, this is the first time waving hi to people, so that's good.
Well, thanks, Zach.
Awesome. You're welcome, all.
Any more questions in the chat room? Okay.
Hey, Zach, you and I should talk soon anyway.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
Okay.
I'll be in contact.
Yep.
Awesome.
Okay. Stay secret.
I will do my best. Very cool. Okay.
Good night.
Good night. Everyone have a safe trip home. And oh god, it's raining again. Okay.
Hey, at least the lightning spared the internet.
That's definitely true. Now I just have to do one more telecom thing, and I'm done for the night.
Don't go out in the rain and melt.
Yeah. I'm sure that the kittens downstairs are not happy about the rain because they were stuck inside all day. So, but yeah, that's all good. Okay, everyone, have a good night. I'll see you later.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome.